Hey guys, it's Josh. I'm excited to talk to you today about the Music Modernization Act. I think it's really important not only for our community as producers, engineers, anybody in the music industry really, but especially if you're an artist, if you have music on Spotify, on Apple Music. It's important. I know the music business side of things is not always the most exciting thing to talk about, but I hope you'll stay tuned because I think it's really important for you to know what's involved in this act and what it's actually going to mean for you moving forward. So the first important date is that this was signed into law on October 11th, 2018. So just a few weeks ago, at the time of this video being made. The second important date is that January 1st, 2020, so a little more than a year from now, is when this is actually going to be enacted and take effect. So what is the Music Modernization Act? That's definitely where we should start, because if you've looked into this at all, like I have over the last few months, you may have found that the information was a little bit confusing, especially before it was signed into law. There were some moving parts. There were some little fights breaking out here and there. Oh no, this person doesn't support it anymore. Or everybody go get them, And that was part of why I waited on making this video. I didn't want to be in the middle of any of that. But in order to understand what it is and what it has become, we need to go back to sort of how it started. Now, the Music Modernization Act, the MMA, as a lot of people are calling it, it actually originated from three different pieces of legislation. There was the original Music Modernization Act, which kind of mostly was focusing on songwriters and their rights and them getting paid. So the second piece of legislation was the Classics Act, and that dealt with recordings that were pre-1972 or around Valentine's Day of 1972. And I'll explain a little bit later why that makes sense and why that date was significant. And the third piece was the AMP Act, which stood for the Allocation for Music Producers. And that was focused on music producer royalties and how they may or may not get paid from streaming as they used to off of, certain recording contracts and physical sales from CDs and downloads and things like that. So these three pieces of legislation sort of morphed into what we now know as the Music Modernization Act. So let's break it up a little bit here. So the first thing for songwriters, why is it important for songwriters? Well, primarily, if you're a songwriter and you're watching this video and you've had anything that you've written and self-released or you wrote for another artist that's on Spotify, that's on Apple Music or any streaming platform, and you've ever gotten a check for that, then you know exactly why it's important for us as songwriters, because we've been dealing with fractions of a penny for most of these plays. I mean, we're not even, it's just crazy how little money has been paid out for these things, and that entire companies and a whole new area of the market, that music streaming has been built on the backs of songwriters and rights holders that honestly have been crushed under the weight of these people launching these businesses. And you've all seen the stories, millions of plays equating to $5,000 or $6,000 checks, and it has not been sustainable from the beginning. So the fact that this is changing things for songwriters is vitally important for the long-term health of the music business overall. Because you take the songwriters out, you're going to have a hard time having a music business at all. The second part of this, the Classics Act side of it, why is it important for recordings pre-1972? Well, what happened is that up until, I think it was February 15th of 1972, there was no federal copyright protection for sound recordings. Now, if you don't understand the difference between a sound recording copyright and the composition or the musical work, we can dive deeper into that in another video. I don't want this one to get too long, so I'll try to stay on track with what we're dealing with. But just know if any of these terms are not quite making sense, I should be online right now because this is our first premiere that we're doing on YouTube. So feel free to type in some questions over in the chat on the side. I'll be sure to do my best to answer that for you, but also in videos coming up, dive in further to anything that you would like to know more about. But the Classics Act, pre-1972 recordings, basically they had no federal level sound recording copyright protection. It was all handled on the state level. And, not to get into politics too much, but anything that's dealt with on the state level is very case-by-case basis. And when you're dealing with sales and performances that are crossing state lines, there was no federal set guidelines or protection for that. So in 1972, they passed protection. Congress passed protection for sound recordings, but they said it's only going to be from this date moving forward. We're not going to get into dealing with all these other existing laws on the state level. So it's been that crazy, believe it or not. There has been that big of gaps in music rights laws to protect songwriters. And so I was born in 1979. I obviously don't have any music that's pre-1972, but I think it's really important to honor those that came before us, that paved the way for us to be able to do what we're doing now, and for them to benefit from it, and their children, and however they pass down their rights. So that to me is one of the biggest wins out of this whole thing. We need to treat those giants that came before us. We need to treat them fairly and pay them for their compositions. So very excited about that part of it. Okay, the AMP Act, dealing with music producers. If you've been around long enough, you may remember a time where when you produced an artist, you would get points on their album, 2-3%, whatever it was. As record deals sort of changed and album sales dwindled, that seemed to really dry up, especially if you weren't like a major producer. So as a producer, that was a crucial, stream of revenue for you for a long time. So how do you adjust? How do you change? Well, the MMA addresses that in the sense that Sound Exchange is going to be responsible for collecting some of these royalties. It's multi-layered, multifaceted, so just bear with me. We're going to get through this the best we can, and then, of course, like I said, subsequent videos can come diving deeper into anything that's of particular interest for you guys. So up until this point, if you wanted to allocate a certain amount of your digital streaming revenue that's collected by Sound Exchange for a producer, you could write them a letter and request it and say, I want 5% of all of the royalties that come in from this recording to go to such and such. So it's been possible, but it's been, not the easiest process in the world. So we'll see how it all pans out. But part of the MMA is that this is supposed to become an easier process. So we'll find out more about that, and I'll let you know as it's made more clear how that's going to work. Compulsory notices, it's my understanding, are going to go away because the MMA makes it way easier now for Spotify or Apple Music to go to this new committee that's been set up called the Music Licensing Collective. It's a new committee set up that can grant these blanket licenses. And then when I say blanket, I mean for everything. Spotify can come to them and say, I want a license for every piece of music that's ever been made. Okay, here you go. So that's great in many regards because it simplifies things. You're not getting these individual compulsory license requests in the mail. You're not like, I don't even know what this is. I don't know what to do with this. So the Music Licensing Collective is going to be responsible for handling all of this. Now this, please, if you don't listen to anything else, please hear me out on this part. This is the scariest part of the MMA to me. And it's why I think the MMA should be seen more as a new beginning, but it's not the end. This is just the beginning. We have to stay focused. We have to pay attention, and we have to see this thing through, and not just see it through, but continue to build on it on top of the great things that are happening now. But don't make the mistake of saying, yay, the MMA passed. Now we're all going to actually get paid for streaming, because it's not quite that, at least not yet. But basically, this Music Licensing Collective is going to be responsible for collecting all these royalties from the streaming platforms. But here's the thing. They're going to hold that money for 3 years. And if you don't claim that money, or you don't already have a deal with them, or they don't know how to get in touch with you, or you're not paying attention, they keep the money. It's in the law. So pay attention. When you put your music out there, when you have projects that you've worked on, as soon as we figure out how to sign up and get affiliated with this music licensing collective, please do it. Because if you don't, they're going to hold your money for 3 years. If you find out about it 3 years and 1 day later, tough. They're keeping your money. They're going to disperse it amongst the music licensing collective, and who knows? Yes, this is great. We have this one unified body that's going to collect our money, but you got to go get it. Okay? They're not, hopefully they'll go out of their way to find you, but I don't know. If I'm sitting on a pile of cash, and if I just wait long enough, I can keep it, I might not be the most motivated guy in the world to find everybody whose money this belongs to. So I want to think the best for them, but just understand we're talking people, we're talking money, and we're talking the music business. That combination has not always been a great mix. So be vigilant, pay attention, and it'll work out for you. So I think the big question for all of us is, now that the MMA has passed, am I going to get paid more when my copyrights, my songs, whatever ownership you have in this that's relevant, when these things get streamed, am I going to get paid more? Well, you think the obvious answer would be yes, and I believe it is, but I think my answer for now is definitely maybe. And the reason I say that is this. First, we need to understand how these rates have been set up to this point anyway. And those are set by the Copyright Royalty Board. Now, the good news is this board made a 50% increase to streaming royalties in early 2018. That's a good thing. But the language, at least to me, is a little bit confusing as to how these rates can be set. It's based on the market value. The good news is the MMA has allowed some other things to be considered that weren't allowed to be considered before, like the price of a download couldn't affect the price of the streaming revenue before, but now it's one of the new things that can be considered. But basically, I don't want you to think, okay, I've been getting paid 0.001 cent per play, and now I'm going to get 10 cents per play. It's not like that. It's not that simple. Hopefully we'll get there someday. What I would recommend is just try to educate yourself a bit on the Copyright Royalty Board. Try to see how this thing all shakes out, who's going to be involved in that, how long those terms are these positions going to rotate? Those are all things to keep an eye on. I just want to say, let's pay attention, because honestly, I mean, you've seen it. All the big studios closing down. You've seen so many of your favorite artists that make this amazing album, and then the very next album they're crowdfunding, which is nothing wrong with crowdfunding. I've done it myself, but you used to see these arcs of careers that seem to continue to grow, and there's been a very low ceiling just financially for what artists and us on the other end of recording and producing can do. So this whole subject has been really of particular interest to me, because 10 years ago, I started a independent record label and publishing company. So I went right through the transition of not just CDs to downloads, but downloads to streaming. And it's been a lot to navigate, but I will say staying educated about it is only going to help you. Just as much passion as we put into trying to be better mixers and songwriters and everything, try to take some of that energy and do it on this end, because long gone are the days where we can just sit back and sort of let somebody else worry about those things. Yes, it's a little overwhelming, but it's also exciting, right? We have more control than ever. We are hopefully more educated than ever, less likely to be taken advantage of. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you understand more about the Music Modernization Act. I'm going to stick around for as long as I can here. We'll see how this YouTube premiere thing works. Please like this video. Please subscribe. If you really love what we're doing here and you always want to be the first to know, ring the bell there. That'll let you know exactly when we upload, when we're going to premiere the next video. And hope you have an awesome weekend and make some great music. I'll see you next week.